Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's 12:30 on Monday, so it must be time for conversations over coffee. I'm Steve Wernick, Rabbi Wernick, one of the rabbis at Beth Tzedek Congregation in Toronto, Ontario. That's in Canada, for those of you who don't know. And it is my pleasure to welcome my guest this morning, who is Marco Mendicino, the Member of Parliament for Eglinton-Lawrence riding in the Greater Toronto Area, and also a member of the government, Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. I asked previously that the minister has given me permission to be familiar with him, so I get to call him by his first name. Marco, thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to see you and to have you with us this morning. Let's start with, tell us a little bit about Canada's goals when it comes to immigration, refugees, and citizenship.
Well, first, it's great to be with you. Thank you so much, Rabbi. When you first told me that we were going to have this chance to have one of your fireside chats, which I understand are becoming very, very popular online, a great way to stay connected. I thought about my relationship to your shul, to Beth Tzedek, and can think back to attending some very, very engaging conversations, going back to your predecessor's time, Rabbi Friedman Cole and Erwin Kotler and Natan Sharansky. So in keeping with the fine tradition, I feel like this is a bit of a milestone for me to be able to join, I think, a very long line of rabbis and special guests, and it truly is an honor to be with you. So let me say thank you at the outset. I also think we're meeting at a very unique moment in our history with everything that is going on, and to be able to talk to you about Canada's contribution to immigration. And in particular, I know we're going to talk about your community and the congregation's dedication to resettling refugees, which is a unique demand that has not been diminished by the pandemic, but in fact is being exacerbated. So I just want to also start by expressing my profound gratitude to you and to the entire community for the tremendous support that you have shown in sponsoring refugees. And I know we're going to get into the details. As far as the broad strokes of immigration are concerned, I have made the case in my tenure as minister that immigration is very much an economic driver. And we have seen that in the many examples throughout Canada's history that where we grow our population, we see our economy grow. And the stats bear that out. 1 in 3 business owners is led by an immigrant. They in turn employ hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and that's a good thing. And there's no doubt that that's been complicated by the pandemic. And so we've had to take the appropriate decisions at the border to ensure that we're protecting the health and safety of Canadians. But we have innovated. We have come so far. And I feel very confident about Canada's future, in large part because of our trajectory when it comes to immigration.
What are some of the innovative solutions that Canada has done with regard to COVID and to immigration?
Well, the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit generally about what we have introduced by way of policy at the border to ensure that we can proceed with safe and orderly immigration. But then I want to talk a little bit more specifically about refugees, because I know this is a space in which Beth Tzedek is showing genuine leadership. When the pandemic first struck a little less than a year ago, and it's hard to believe, but we are now 11 months into this, we had to adapt very quickly to ensure that Canada could continue to receive the workers, the students that we need to keep our economy going. And whether it's with regards to food, and I think about our migrant workers who are slogging away under very challenging conditions, where we have provided additional support to them so that Canadians can get access to affordable food, or more especially in the healthcare sector, where doctors and nurses and personal support workers have been going 24/7. And I mean, I have many of those as constituents in my riding, and I work very closely with them and am responsive and sympathetic to their concerns. And we need a second shift of healthcare professionals to meet the second wave of the pandemic. Immigration can be that lever. And so developing the policies, the immigration routes, the corridors that we need, while at the same time guarding against the risks of the pandemic, has been a priority. And again, the numbers bear out our success on that. We have been able to ensure that Canadians get access to the food, the fuel, and increasingly the health supplies. I mean, think about where we are at right now in the cycle. we need vaccines. And in order to be ensure that we're getting vaccines into the country, we need the appropriate personnel and essential workers, not only to receive them, but then to distribute them. And that gets back to the healthcare sector. So immigration has evolved very rapidly throughout the last year. And I think going forward, what I see, what my vision is for our immigration system is that it becomes more digital, more touchless, and more efficient, and that we are really leveraging all of the new technologies which are at our disposal so that we can see these outcomes and we can see our economic recovery accelerate, because that is going to be, in conjunction with the health and safety of Canadians, our number one priority.
I read, I think it was in the Globe and Mail, that for Canada to continue to grow economically and to prosper, there was some really large number of immigration that we needed to look at for like the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think there's like 36 million Canadians now. And the number I read was increasing that almost by 25%. Is that the kind of target you're looking at? And where do you anticipate these immigrants to come from?
Well, your question is spot on for a number of reasons. One, because it talks about where we need to be in the long run. And Canada as a country is aging rapidly. We are seeing the baby boomers retire. And, you know, those are folks like my parents who have put in a lifetime worth of contributions to our workforce and who are now hoping to retire. But in order to ensure that we're keeping our covenants with regards to retirement security, universal health care, public education, we need to replenish. And the reality is that our birth rates have declined. And so without immigration, we are really strapped for those resources. And so it is going to be a real lifeline going forward. And in terms of what our plan is for the next 3 years, we plan to grow by 401, 411, and 421,000 new Canadians, respectively, over those 3 years. Represented as a percentage of our total population, that's just a little over 1%. And the OECD and other international organizations have recognized that Canada is the best in class when it comes to integration. Now, that's not just because we have good immigration systems and we have a system that aligns where the gaps in our economy is to to the skill set from the best and the brightest around the world. It's because of the Canadian people. It's because communities are open to the idea of welcoming new immigrants because we relate to it. You know, they're our relatives, they're our coworkers, they are our neighbors, and we see them. And that is, again, one of the real narratives that and I think not only me and government, but right across our society, business leaders and settlement servers, including the community at large, like yourself, are so important to really take good care of that narrative, because we know, particularly given the complicated times in which we live, we have to really safeguard that people have trust and faith and confidence when it comes to immigration.
So related to that, I'd like to ask you to perhaps think a little bit deeper about that. It's astonishing to me, being someone who's an American citizen and came from south of the border just 2 years ago. Although I did grow up in Winnipeg, I think I share with you. I mean, so my junior high and high school years, my father was a rabbi in Winnipeg. So I have authentic Canadian experience. But what's astonishing to me is the high number of the percentage of the Canadian population that's in favor of immigration from abroad. That's just astonishing. And Toronto in particular is known as one of the most multicultural diverse cities in the world. What do you think's, what's behind that cultural impulse for acceptance and diversity?
I think as an experiment in nation building, Canada has always been open to receiving newcomers from abroad. I mean, we're a large, vast country. We are blessed with oceans, and we're blessed with natural resources. We have an abundance of it that is truly the envy of the world. And I think in those vast spaces, we have, I think with the tremendous amount of historic success, been able to attract people from every corner of the world. And what I think has contributed to, I think, a consistent belief that immigration is a strength, that diversity is a strength, is in the way that we have been able to come together to build this country. And of course, that is not just actual bricks and mortar. That is a shared sense of principle and values that we respect one another. We respect the many differences that we bring to the table. We see them as a strength. And that's not something that we have the luxury of taking for granted. I don't think that it is a sort of a birthright to just be given the opportunity to be in Canada, to live here in relative peace and harmony. You have to work at it. And as democracies go, I think we have shown a real resilience. Now, as I alluded to in my last answer, there is every reason to really double down on those efforts. We have to take very good care of what we have established here in Canada. And when I think about what our immigration system is designed to do, which is to look at our economy and to find those gaps where we need them plugged with people who want to come and build that next chapter in their lives, we have to demonstrate to the Canadian public that we can deliver on that. And in the context of a pandemic, that means ensuring that we have the necessary protocols in place when it comes to screening for the pandemic, but it also means ensuring that we're working very collaboratively with business leaders, with the faith community, with communities at large, so that they're confident that we are continuing to build this country. And I mean, I'm an optimist, as you can probably tell, but you do have to work at it. And I think we have laid out a plan which will see us continue to grow in our prosperity going forward.
So I, as a member of the Jewish community, the immigration and refugee policy today, as you said, I think is a lot for us to be proud of, although it wasn't always that case. The Jewish community still remembers very much after the Second World War, how officials in the Canadian government, the foreign minister, I think, was overheard saying that with regard to the Jews, that none is too many. This became, of course, a book that Professor Irvin Abello, who's a member of Bet Tzedek, famously wrote about this. What are some of the lessons that you think Canada has learned since that time? And what are the safeguards that are in place to make sure that kind of sentiment doesn't rear itself again, either towards the Jews or to any other minority that may be seeking refuge in Canada?
I think it's a timely reflection, Rabbi, and your question has caused me to reflect. I'm familiar with Professor Abella and Harold Troper's book, None is Too Many, which was actually a quote taken from an immigration officer at the time who had made some of those remarks off the record, quote unquote. And what I recall from the book at the outset in a foreword was that to the condemned Jews of Auschwitz, Canada was, it represented many, many special things. It represented life and safe sanctuary. It was a Garden of Eden. But in that same metaphoric way that we read, in the Torah, in the Bible, it was unreachable for so many. And so what I think the lesson of that era tells us is that while we take great pride in our immigration today, we do not have an unblemished and uncheckered history in Canada. And in fact, so much of the anti-Semitism of that era, which was born out of the Second World War, and in fact, for millennia, the world's oldest hate, was a driver of the boogeymaning that we see around immigration, and those voices who would demonize the other and who would call on the government to cut back immigration and shut the door and keep it shut. And I think we have to really, again, remind ourselves that these are the narratives that can so often creep back into our discourse today. And we see that despite the lessons of the past, and I was, there with the Prime Minister when he made the official apology for the St. Louis and the some 900 souls who were Jews who were turned back on that ship to Europe, many of whom were condemned to a death sentence as a result. And so that was an important moment to acknowledge that particular moment in our history. But it's not as though that apology now immunizes us from future anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and other forms of hate. Quite the contrary. I think, sadly and tragically, what the pandemic has done is it has exacerbated those old forms of hate, and we see them creeping back into our narrative. And so I think the way that we can immunize against that virus, that hate, is by calling it out. And I think in that respect, the federal government has shown singular leadership by, among other things, adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is a very useful tool, I think, not only to law enforcement as we try to make responsible decisions in identifying new forms of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, other forms of hate, whether it's in school, in workplaces, or in our communities, but equally within our communities, we can draw from those definitions so that we can educate not only in our immediate circles, but more broadly. And by building those coalitions, and I know Rabbi Beth Tzedek is again a real leader in this regard in building interfaith dialogue, so that we really understand what are the origins, why is it that we are so susceptible to this form of manipulation, which can lead to harassment and bullying and violence and worse. And it is only through, I think, that kind of conscientiousness that we can develop the bulwarks that are necessary, but also to prevent it. And here again, I think I see a bridge between those broad efforts, the efforts that we're undertaking with regards to security infrastructure, and what you are doing when it comes to resettling refugees. And that to me is how we build a community, by extending a hand of compassion and understanding to the world's most vulnerable. We are showing that we can lead by example.
Thank you for that, Marco. And also, please relay our appreciation to the Prime Minister and to the government for its steadfast, unambiguous support and condemnation against anti-Semitism, the importance of accepting the IRA, the International Human Rights Association definition of anti-Semitism. Canada has really been one of the clearest moral voices in the world about that, and certainly we in the Jewish community appreciate that. I want to turn to refugees with the time that we have remaining. As you've alluded to, Beth Tzedek is very engaged in the refugee resettlement projects. In 2016, we sponsored an Ismaili Syrian refugee family of 5, and two members of that family that we sponsored have been working through the pandemic as essential workers. The mom just completed a course on medical instrument sterilization. And then following International Refugee Day on June 20th, members of our Refugee Sponsorship Committee began a letter writing campaign to their friends and family to raise funds for sponsoring a Christian Eritrean family of 6 that are currently in an Ethiopian refugee camp. I know it's inappropriate to ask you about specific cases, so I won't do that. But we see, and I think we expect a refugee crisis to increase in the world, especially from Africa, as it relates to climate change, increasing droughts, loss of agriculture, and other working types of conditions, and people moving north to Europe, and then also across the ocean to Canada and to the United States. As a signatory to the UN Convention on Refugees, is Canada looking at any policy changes to balance, especially during COVID, to balance protection of public health with our obligation to welcome and protect refugees?
First, I just want to reiterate my sincere gratitude to you and to the members of Beth Tzedek, who have done tremendous work in opening up your arms and your community to receive refugees. I just cannot state enough how important it is that you continue to show a commitment in this area. We don't take it for granted, particularly now as we find ourselves in the midst of COVID-19. It's because of your unyielding enthusiasm to be leaders when it comes to welcoming the world's most vulnerable that Canada has garnered a reputation that is unparalleled when it comes to refugee resettlement. In fact, the United Nations has recognized for 2 years in a row that Canada is the #1 resettling country in the world, and that is a hard-earned accolade, which again is driven by you and communities right across the country. And yes, of course, we have to make sure that we have the right policies put in place, but it's up to you to deliver, and you are delivering. And we can't say thank you enough. And the UNHCR, has said, and Filippo Grande, who I've come to know, he is the High Commissioner for the UN when it comes to refugees, has said that Canada is a bright light, in a very, very difficult and horrible time when it comes to the world and what has happened as a result of COVID-19. I will say that there are a number of areas where I think we need to continue to really push the envelope and to try and innovate in a way that is that will help us live up to that reputation going forward. So without question, it's important that we first and foremost have the appropriate policies at the border, as well as in conjunction with our international partners, who, by the way, and that's the UNHCR, who refers refugees, the IOM, who also helps us both in sponsoring refugees, but also does some of the screening abroad for us. We're also very significantly impacted by COVID-19, but are starting to get back into more of an operational capacity that is consistent with pre-COVID levels. We need to be sure, in addition to that, that we are listening to you. And by that, I had the chance to familiarize myself somewhat with your journey in sponsoring refugees. And I think, the community makes a number of really important observations around what the barriers are, both before arrival when it comes to supporting your sponsorees with the necessary information so that their applications can be sponsored, but equally, once they arrive in Canada, making sure that they can overcome the cultural and linguistic and job barriers, which so often impact their integration into the community. And so I think part of what I'd like to see going forward is an ongoing, robust conversation with you and with other resettlement service providers who have sponsored refugees, so that we can modify our policies in a way that is truly innovative, that reduces the cultural, linguistic, and job training barriers that exist, so that those refugees can start to contribute, sponsor their families, and then achieve a positive outcome. Because by doing that, I think we can then achieve our success. And look, our goals are ambitious. There's two schools of thought. There was a choice last year. We could have taken our foot off of the pedal when it comes to immigration, or we could have continued to grow. And certainly my view and the view of our government is that in order to continue to achieve a path of prosperity, we believe that immigration is part of that, and so too is fulfilling our obligations when it comes to refugees. And so making those modifications based on your feedback will be an important part of innovating in the exercise.
Well, I know that we would be happy to participate in that, and I'll speak for JIAS, the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society, that the Jewish community works with when it's sponsoring refugees, that I'm sure they would be excited to have a part in that conversation. And I think you're right. The three key ingredients for any successful settlement are community, language, and employment. If you can overcome those three obstacles within a year to 2 years, that bodes well long-term for one's success in the environment in which they live. We're sponsoring this family, and we're a little frustrated, I think, with the gap between being able to get them to the country right now. And so anything that the government can do to lower those barriers certainly in our experience, I think would be greatly appreciated. When you're talking about refugees, though, it's a different type of immigration than the immigration we were talking about before. What is Canada's approach and its vision in terms of protecting refugees, especially as we look to the future? There seems to be an expectation that the refugee crisis is going to grow. Does Canada see itself continuing to lead the world in its work to protect refugees? And what are some of the specific ways that it imagines that it will do so?
Very much so. My expectation and our government's commitment is to continue to demonstrate leadership when it comes to resettling the world's most vulnerable. And I can think of a number of concrete ways in which we are living up to those expectations. First and foremost, I think by setting our goals appropriate to what the demands are. And you alluded to it in your question, Rabbi, but it's not as though COVID-19 has somehow magically just solved the world's migration crisis. On the contrary, the United Nations reports most recently last summer, I think, prove that we have a growing problem, and with some 80 million displaced and growing because of conflict and persecution. And increasingly, I would note, because of the changes to our climate, which, we're taking robust action on here in Canada. But that doesn't solve it necessarily for what's occurring with rising tides and water levels, or droughts, or fires, or famines that we see in some other parts of the world. And so I think that the pressure will continue to mount. And so for our part, I think first and foremost, it begins by setting a commitment target that is the highest it has ever been, which signals to the world that Canada will be a leader in the space. But in addition to that, we're also, I think, showing that we can really be at the vanguard of a debate around how we can integrate refugees. And one of the traps that I think that we tend to fall into, all of us, is that we stereotype them as victims of circumstances that are beyond their control. But the reality is this: that refugees are also teachers, they're also doctors, they're engineers, they're musicians, they're artists, they're entrepreneurs. They have skills to bring to the table. And so by introducing pilot projects which seek to reduce those barriers and accelerate their path into our communities, I think people are looking to us. And, we work with organizations like Talent Beyond Boundaries, who, help to really align those refugees who possess a higher skill set that can be placed into very targeted areas within our economy. And we hope to scale up those types of pilots. But in addition to that, we're also leading on the international stage. I agreed on behalf of the government to ensure that we're a co-chair on the Global Compact when it comes to migration. We are leading the way when it comes to showing other countries our success when it comes to private sponsorship, and that includes, sharing the successes of Beth Tzedec. I think about the work that is being led by Professor Jennifer Bond at the University of Ottawa in the Global Refugee Settlement Initiative, or the GRSI, who is exporting that to other countries. I think about our commitment to make way at the big tables where these issues are being discussed for refugees themselves, because it's by creating that space that we are ensuring that refugees have a voice to help us usher in the reforms that are necessary so that we can navigate these challenges together. And I was very proud a little more than a year ago to welcome Mustafa Ayalo, who was the first ever refugee to be part of Canada's official delegation. In fact, the first ever refugee, to my knowledge, to be part of an official delegation at the UN. I welcomed him in Geneva. We got an applause that is, that still I can hear to this day. It's by showing those types of examples of leadership that Canada will continue to be a leader when it comes to upholding human rights by offering a safe refuge for the world's most vulnerable.
What's the expected timeline from once a refugee begins the application process to their ability to actually land in the country?
Well, of course, it will depend on which stream they're coming in, and so there are different streams of resettling a refugee. One, of course, is through private sponsorship, and of course, COVID has had an impact on that, and I'll be the first to acknowledge it. But in addition to that, we also have pathways for government-assisted refugees, as well as a sort of a hybrid where we have some government assistance as well as some sponsorship from private communities. It's a blended system, and together, we hope to, shape new lives for some close to 60,000 refugees this year. Much of it will be contingent on how we continue to navigate COVID-19. We're confident that we have a vaccine rollout strategy in place that will help us start to reduce some of those barriers and see delays come down. But I have to say, from where we were a year ago to where we are now is quantum leaps. And I will say as well that notwithstanding COVID-19, we have continued to resettle refugees, particularly those who are in dire circumstances where their lives are hanging by a very thin thread. And so our capacity to continue to resettle the most urgent cases in partnership with international organizations like the UN and the IOM, as well as the assistance of communities, shows that we are in no way going to be diminished by COVID-19, and we'll continue to work hard to get our processing times down to what they were pre-COVID-19.
Well, we're certainly happy to hear that. Our family that we're sponsoring is currently not in a refugee camp in Ethiopia. They've been able to be relocated to a nearby city, but it's still very dangerous as members are being rounded up and sent back to the camp. So we hope that that won't happen for them and that we'll be able to bring them here as quickly as possible. Just to bring this to a close, first of all, thank you, Marco. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time and helping us to share the awareness and the education of Canada's position as it regards to immigration and refugees. We at Bethsedec, of course, care deeply about this issue. We as Jews, we've been refugees. We've been a wandering people. For thousands of years, we've wandered from place to place. Our experience has changed drastically since the end of the Second World War, both in terms of the eventual welcome to the United States and to Canada and to North America, and especially since the establishment of the State of Israel, which has ensured that the Jewish people have a homeland where refuge is always available to them should they so need it. We also, this week in our Torah reading cycle, we're in the Exodus. What's the story of Exodus if not ultimately a story of refugees, of a people that were oppressed, of a people that escaped, and a people that wandered to find a new home. So this is very timely that we're doing this. Private sponsorship of a family of 6, as Bethsedec is doing, costs about $50,000. That's fees to working with the government, that's fees to bring them here, and also, and most importantly, fees to settle them. At Bethsedec, we've raised so far about $30,000 of that. So we invite you to help us close that gap and to finish our fundraising so that we have all the funds that we need to bring this family of 6 to Canada and to launch them on what will hopefully be a successful career as Canadians. Toward that end, on the 18th, we invite you to join us for our next book club with Irving Matlow. He'll be talking about his book At the Family Table in conversation with his son, David. The $25 cost for that, all the proceeds go to the Refugee Sponsorship Committee to help sponsor a refugee. And then on February 18th, David Besmogis will be our guest talking about his book, Immigrant City. Same thing, we are using these programs as opportunities for people to learn more about the experience of refugees and also to contribute. If you would like to contribute beyond that, please visit us online, www.beth-tzedek.com. eclinton.org. And in the donation section, you can drop down to the refugee sponsorship, and we will say thank you very much for all the sponsorship that you do. Marco, again, thank you for being with us. We wish you well. We're certainly, as you know, cheering for Canada to continue its leadership in this area, and we hope to be able to celebrate with you in the not too distant future as this entering family arrives in Canada, and we launch them in their new lives. Thank you,
Rabbi,
everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, Rabbi, just if I didn't know any better, I would have said you would have timed the teachings of the Torah with this talk today. But I want to thank you and to all of the viewers, and particularly your congregants, for creating a promised land for the refugees that have come and for those that are still yet to arrive. And let us be inspired by those teachings as we go forward together. So